With the advent of the COVID pandemic, um, as early as January, um, uh, people who I knew both in the RNA vaccine industry, but also other professors of virology here at Stanford, they put it on my radar that we should take a look at it. So we started our pivot probably in February, and it was really scary. Um, it was I would say, a huge risk for us. Um, we have done several modes of research related to COVID, but the one that I want to describe in detail is our work on RNA vaccines. We knew that there were going to be folks trying to make mRNA vaccines for COVID, although we knew that they'd never been created at scale. We knew that those mRNA vaccines would have a big problem with mass immunization because they have to be kept frozen, they're unstable. But they were, although they were starting to become headlines by March that Moderna, Pfizer, and other pharma companies and biotech companies were going to create RNA vaccines and put them into trials, there was no one talking about the stability issues, But that was a set of problems that I realized that we could have a big impact on. We ended up recruiting thousands of people on the internet through a video game that we call Eterna to help us redesign RNA vaccines and to test them experimentally. And that's resulted in the discovery of principles for designing vaccines that I think, again, would have taken us several years and was accelerated by almost 10x because of this internet scale crowdsourcing video game platform called Eterna. So we have just figured out how to stabilize mRNA molecules by to increase their lifetimes by, it looks like, at least a factor of 5 when they would go into prefilled syringes. This looks like if this translates into the current RNA vaccines that are being shipped around the world, it would mean that they actually no longer will have to be shipped frozen. It means they could be packaged into prefilled syringes at the factory, and they go under our usual refrigerated supply chain networks, our usual cold chain, the same way that we all around the world get flu shots, for example. And so, I mean, that I think then will let the RNA vaccines scale from, let's say, millions or maybe hundreds of millions of people to tens of, to 10 billion doses, which is what we need to take out COVID. And along the way, to make this happen, we now know what we have success. We know what led to the success. There are 3 distinct computational innovations were required. One was actually a computer algorithm called EternaFold, which was based on 10 years of data that we've collected on the Eterna platform in the context of these internet scale crowdsourcing initiatives to solve other RNA design problems. And now we're able to distill a lot of that information into predictive algorithms through modern machine learning. Another approach was a design method that we had developed for also on Eterna to design RNA diagnostics. It's an algorithm that we just are announcing this year called RiboTree, which involves Monte Carlo tree search, and that's actually a technique that comes from the world of game playing algorithms. And then a third innovation, set of innovations, came from actually yet another form of crowdsourcing. So we ended up at Stanford, we ended up collaborating with a platform called Kaggle, which is over the last 10 years has become the world's leading platform for recruiting data scientists to the hardest machine learning problems in the world. And so we partnered with them. And at a critical point in 2020, when we were getting a kind of deluge of data on how mRNA vaccines get degraded, we teamed up with them to bring to bear the best machine learning experts in the world. So it's an interesting thing. Probably for the first time, we've connected two big crowdsourcing platforms, Eterna on the one hand, and this Kaggle platform, and magic ended up happening. We ended up with predictive algorithms that were more than twice as good as what we were able to create in-house for my own Stanford machine learning team. So on the computation side, there's three big innovations. Each of those would be, I think, for me, maybe even a career-making innovation, but they all happened this year and built on quite a bit of unusual research on Eterna that had happened over the previous 8 or 9 years. On the experimental side of things, we, in collaboration with Maria Barna's lab in genetics, we had to invent the tools to synthesize a bunch of candidate RNA, mRNA molecules and test their stability and see if they were expressed in human cells. And those technologies didn't, even the synthesis tools to make all those RNAs didn't exist before February of 2020. So, if you think about it, like, we couldn't have done this, and that was part of the risk. So that was tremendously exciting to, for the first time, actually be able to make, we were getting thousands of solutions in from Eterna players. Before 2020, we wouldn't even been able to create those molecules in the lab and test them. That's a huge innovation, a set of innovations. And that's resulted in 5 patent applications. And so, it's legit innovation. And it was made possible by about 24 people at Stanford who are working in the context of a Stanford-wide shutdown to invent novel experiments through socially distanced experiments. So I think that was remarkable too. And then I think in terms of social innovation, Eterna has been a long-standing platform and has always been able to pull in super smart people who maybe kind of come out of the woodwork and find themselves to be great RNA design experts. But I think this year, early on, there's a new kind of partnership that arose on Eterna that I'm really excited about, that I think will carry forward. So we partnered with Prairie View A&M University actually back in February. One of the top players on Eterna happens to be a professor at this historically Black college university near Houston. And through that connection, many of the Eterna participants who contributed to our OpenVaccine work ended up coming from Black and Hispanic communities through that Prairie View connection, actually through a set of internships that we created over the summer and through a course that we created this fall. And and their designs had a big impact on our ability to then create these stabilized RNA vaccines. That's something that I think will be going forward. And there's a real prospect here of not just citizen scientists impacting the future of medicine, like a flu vaccine, or the next CRISPR therapy, or the next cancer immunotherapy, but actually folks who are from underrepresented communities who normally would not be connected to a, say, a prestigious or elite research institution, who are now able to contribute at a very top level, be co-authors on papers that didn't exist before 2020. And I'm really excited about that going forward. I think, I suspect that, for example, our flu vaccines in 4 or 5 years will be created by these people who would normally not be represented within the elite scientific research circles. It was, I think, a huge risk for us to go and jump into this, but I would say that the thing that made it, one of the key things that made it happen was being able to find donors who had the foresight to support us, even though this is not RNA vaccine stabilization wasn't one of the big problems at the time, and who appreciated that the approaches that my lab could bring, like this Eterna platform, which is a little bit insane. It's hundreds of thousands of people who we solicit, citizen scientists with no expert training. The fact that some donors believe that could be a transformative approach to to answer the question, to figure out how to stabilize an mRNA in a few months rather than a few years or decades. So having that support, financial, moral support from donors, and I would say also from the rest of Stanford. So our Stanford leadership, the dean of the School of Medicine, lawyers who were helping with IP agreements, and development officers. You know, it was like an all hands thing and it was because we had all the support, we just went for it. And I was able to recruit collaborators, launch these so-called OpenVaccine challenges on Eterna, and here we are a few months later, and it's worked.